Welcome to Reignite Your Life, Women 50 Plus. It's time to reboot and revolutionize your midlife with passion, purpose, and possibility. Your host for this event is international transformative coach and facilitator, relationship coach, health and wellness coach, and filmmaker, Jeannie Bird.
Welcome to Reignite Your Life, Women 50 Plus. It is time to reboot and revolutionize our midlife. I'm Jeannie Bird, a master transformative coach and facilitator, and I am committed to inspiring women, especially in midlife, to access their deepest desires so the second act of their life can be filled with passion, purpose, and possibility. And today, in order to help us facilitate just that, I am so honored to have as our guest Dr. Marj Britt. Marj, would you love to say hello to our audience?
Hello, everyone, and hello, world. What a joy it is to be here today.
Great. I'd like to just tell everybody a little bit about Marj's background. She founded Called by Love in 2011 as the universe began to call her to a worldwide platform that was beyond the bricks and mortar platform of the Unity of Tustin. Marj was a visionary leader there in Tustin for 19 years. And the Unity of Tustin is widely known for its beautiful meditation gardens and as a campus of consciousness. And Unity of Tustin has hosted some of the foremost master teachers of today. Marj has also served as senior minister for 2 ministries in the San Francisco Bay Area. And before ministry, she completed a doctoral degree at the University of Massachusetts School of Education with a focus in curriculum, psychological education, and counseling. And her dissertation was called Life Patterns of High Success. And she attended seminary at Unity School of Christianity and was ordained in 1988. She has served on the seminary board, the Academic Governors Council, as well as in other national leadership roles. She is a mystic in the world, a master teacher with consciousness and love as the living flame of her life. And Marj is the founder of Called by Love Institute, a nonprofit organization, as well as livinglovinglegacy.com. The first worldwide Living Loving Legacy Telesummit brought together some of the most significant explorers of the maps of consciousness of our time, including Andrew Harvey, Constance Kellogg, Don Beck, James Twyman, Jean Houston, John Welshons, Patricia Albert, Roger Houston, Roger Walsh, and Russ Hudson. Marj has just completed her second summit, Living Loving Legacy, living your destiny, loving your life, and realizing your, I think I screwed that up. Marj will correct me on that when she begins talking. So in light of that, Marj, I'd love you to correct me on that. And then to start in with what has reignited your life.
You know, it's so beautiful how we can just pause and take a moment as our life unfolds and say, oh, maybe I screwed that up. And we breathe deeply and we use that as the launching pad for our next platform, our next leap into the unknowing, our next journey in the essence of the all that is. And so it's all perfect as it fits together in its perfection and its imperfection, all working together in amazing and magnificent ways. So it is about living your destiny. It's about loving your life as you live your destiny and realizing legacy. So those master teachers that were on that original telesummit were all people who had been at Unity of Tustin many of whom came before they were famous, before they were well known. An example of that is Adyashanti, who is such a dear friend of mine. And, we walked along the sidewalk together in La Jolla and talked about um, consciousness. And I said, Adya, you have a mission for the world. And he said, oh, right now it's just sort of Southern California. What I know is that everyone listening to this call today has that same kind of mission, just as you do, Jeannie, just as I do. We are called to purpose and passion and possibility and destiny. We are called, all of us, called by love in our own unique and perfect ways. It's only up to us to recognize them.
Right. And that is the nugget of inspiration I'm so excited for you to share with us today, because I know that you are a master at listening to those yearnings that are living inside our body and then bringing them out into the world and making them manifest. So it's going to be a rich dialogue. So how did you, Marj, reignite your life? Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Well, so many times we have plans, and that's a very natural process in our emergence and growing up and developing from childhood into adulthood. And we began to create plans for ourselves and set goals. What we don't realize at that point in time, often in the stages of our life, is that we make those things up with our human mind, which often works pretty well for a time at least. And then sometimes we begin to feel inner promptings and inner knowing, or we begin to feel a stirring, and sometimes it'll show up even as a dissatisfaction or a feeling like there's more than this. It doesn't fill my heart yearning now the way perhaps I thought it would. And so we began to ask, what's next? And in my life, some of those moments, interestingly, were preceded by heartbreak, endings, some of which I did not want. And some of the successes that I had, especially during that time at the University of Massachusetts and my doctoral degree and that doctoral dissertation on patterns of high success in people's lives, I chose that very consciously. But from levels of my human mind, from stages in my own awareness, which included, for me, I was in my 30s then, a lot of developing stages of positive ego, of positive personal emergence. Now it's very different. There's a whole dissolve of a lot of that into something that's so much vaster. And the first dissolve happened actually, interestingly, with the ending of a marriage. And that I didn't want to end, and yet it ended anyway. And that was my first call. I called it I am called by God. It was my call into ministry. And it took me out of a whole career in public education and thinking I was moving toward working in the corporate world and the realms of human resource development, into a much different call, called by God. And I became a unity minister and served in that role for almost 30 years. And that was so fulfilling and so amazing. I thought it would be for the rest of my life. And then a whole other level of dissolve occurred when I was in the shift from my 60s into my 70s. And I called it my whiteboard being erased.
Yeah.
more dissolve, more heartbreak, including the ending of a relationship, the death of someone that I deeply, deeply loved, that I'd known since childhood when I was a teenager. And suddenly I find myself in another kind of call. Actually, with the awareness coming in, just sort of sitting mindlessly, curling my hair in front of the mirror one morning, thinking about nothing important, and the awareness suddenly dropping in. Your concept of God is too limited. You are now called by love.
Wow. Oh,
And my human mind said, what does that mean? And it's been revealing itself to me ever since.
wow. Wow. That is so profound. Oh, so you've actually had, just for sake of ease in my introduction, I talk about, the two acts, the second act, the first 50 years and then the second 50 years. But you have demonstrated there's so many acts that you have
Yes,
been through in your life, and you've been reinventing and reinventing as you go and listening, and your destiny keeps revealing itself.
that's exactly the way it works. If
Yeah.
we're open to it, and if we're open to the cosmic yes, and what I promise you and promise all of the listeners is that if we say yes to that cosmic exploration, it will take us into things our human mind can't even imagine. It will take us into realms of possibility and potential and vastness that we've never even thought of. And that's what's happened to me. And it's still happening. And I'm in my 70s.
Yes. Oh my gosh, this is so exciting. So, this really kind of dovetails into what we were speaking about yesterday. This old perspective of the 50 plus being this downhill ride, as opposed to what you and I, and thankfully thousands of others now realize to be the time of purpose, passion, and possibility. And it's a rise, not a downhill slide. So, can you speak more about that?
We're moving into more and more of our realized potential. The realization of all that destiny intends for us and intends to live through us and as us. Our personal kind of identity, at least for me, seems to dissolve into something that's vaster. And we become an instrument. We become a vessel. We become that which contains that potential for us to realize for ourselves, but more important than that, to realize it in the world with and for others. And it's almost like we've had way showers, we've had guides, we've had mentors, we've had glimpses, we've had teachers. There have been those who went before us, waves, and now we're riding the crest of one of the most significant waves in the history of humankind. A wave which some sages, such as Ken Wilber, have called a tipping point, where literally, when enough people reach those potentials in consciousness, that potential held in that arena as a field of love, a field of consciousness, a field of emerging light, has the potential to literally save the world. We become the saviors of the world, not personally, but through consciousness.
Right. Beautiful. Beautiful. I remember that saying by Gandhi, the world will be saved by the Western woman. You know, I love that. So that actually sort of dovetails into another question, because I want to kind of circle back to the
Uh-huh.
upward swing that we were talking about, but then you talked about the wave, and We were talking about those three waves of consciousness. So let's begin from the beginning, the first wave in early feminism, and if we can go through to this, to our third one that we're living now.
The first wave went way, way back. Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Susan B. Anthony. My grandmother heard Susan B. Anthony speak when she
Really?
was pounding the pathway, doing the circuit and the early feminists were so passionate. It was so fascinating. Susan B. Anthony was married, had a family, and yet here she is a speaker for something that is so far beyond her time. Did I say Susan B. Anthony?
Yes.
I meant Elizabeth Cady Stanton.
Yes.
And Susan B. Anthony was a single woman who lived her passion in a very different way. And yet they collaborated and became change makers in the world and opened doors for many women to follow, including the next wave of women that included people like Gloria Steinem, and the wave where I was in my 20s and 30s at that time, 30s mostly, and all of a sudden things became ignited with me that I didn't even know were there. I didn't know about how the culture had literally dismissed women, and how women were learning, just beginning to learn, to experience their own voice.
Right.
And during that time was when I ended up going to New York and working in publishing. I worked at a small publishing house called the Feminist Press for a year, and that opened for me the door into the doctoral program at the University of Massachusetts. I couldn't have even imagined that this was going to be part of my life. It's what I've often called following the dots, following the points of light, and they reveal themselves to you only as you say yes to one point of light at a time. And some of the dots may actually feel more like darkness than light, because they may involve endings of ways that we thought our life was, or things that we didn't want in our life. For me, for example, that included the death of my only child when he was only 45. That was 10 years ago. So we go through heartbreak, and we go through moments of just accelerated awareness where consciousness is saying this and this and this.
Right.
And Living Loving Legacy is an example of that in my life. And I know that this telesummit that you have so beautifully and tenderly nurtured and held as purpose and passion and promise, it's part of that in your life.
Right.
We say yes to things we don't even know how to do.
Yes, exactly. And we just do them, and we enlisted support from others to help us.
Yes.
That's so primary. We really, really need to be, reaching out with relatedness and connection. And in our passion, like you were drawn to this summit because of my passion, as I'm drawn to you because of everything that you have done in the world. And I know that what you share is just so important for all of our audience to be hearing. So I'd love you to go back. What was the second wave of consciousness?
Well, the second wave I think about as that wave where Betty Friedan came in and Gloria Steinem came in. That was the wave where I really learned about women and the energy field of women with potential and power. But it's a different kind of power. It's a power of its own kind, and it holds a feminine power. And you know about that because two of the people that have been important in your life are Catherine and Claire.
Right.
And they are masters of the describing of that feminine power. So beautifully, beautifully, once again, carried into the world. And so I think what we experience are different waves of it coming in with new levels of integration and new levels of consciousness. And the culture is still catching up with each of the waves. And those of us who are in the immense gift of having the cosmic gift of the awareness of consciousness of this emergence become way showers for those who will follow.
Right.
And so it's almost as if we have one hand stretched forward and we're holding the hand of people who have gone before us. And we have another hand stretched backward. And we're extending our hand to those who will follow us. And we become holders of legacy and lineage.
Exactly. Oh, that's so beautifully put. I just see that visual in my mind's eye. It
Yes.
is so potent. So, what would you say about this third wave in terms of we're actually, yes, we're the way showers, and we're responsible when we wake up to help midwife this consciousness and create a higher order of relatedness in the world. That's our responsibility as the 50 plus women. So we not only have our own personal lives to evolve, but we need to keep that consciousness that we are responsible.
You know, in the second wave, there seemed to be almost a reactive energy in some ways to the dismissal of women that was addressed with the first wave. And as women gained the right to vote, and as women stepped into more roles of the energy of active potential, especially during World War II, where men were taken off to war and women had to step in and become Rosie the Riveter. They were forced to step in to roles that took them out of their feminine nature. But then there was a period of time where the dismissal of men almost became part of an energy field that was out of balance in the opposite direction.
Yeah.
And the thing that is happening now is a whole different emergence. It's the emergence of a more balanced energy, of the masculine and the feminine coming into a relationship of emergence, honoring each other, honoring the potentials of that within us, the divine masculine within my own being, as well as the divine feminine within the being of all men, and as well as the divine masculine emerging in them in their fullest potential. It's a beautiful, beautiful time to be living on the planet, and it holds immense responsibility for those of us who are aware of this dynamic of emergence. It's an emergence that involves the fullest potential of all women and the fullest potential of all men, and ultimately that potential being realized first within our own being,
Right.
in its essence, both the active and the receptive, and then finding that in the world and partnering both with men and with women in the next level of emergence, which is still to come relative to the worldwide scene.
Right.
There's still much to be done. And the tipping point is so deeply, deeply needed.
Right. And I love what you're saying about the masculine and the feminine now coming together. It's like there has been a reverence that's been created as opposed to, like you're talking about in the first and the second wave. There was, women were inferior, men were superior. And now at the beginning of the third wave, it was the tables were turned. Men were inferior, And now this really reverent coming together. You're right, this is the tipping point of the next wave. We don't even really know what it is, and that there's so much excitement in the unknowing as well.
Yes. And I'm totally clear that there's waves beyond it. There's waves of recognizing twin souls. There's waves of recognizing group souls. There's waves of recognizing the bridges between the visible and the invisible. I mean, the vastness keeps opening to us.
Yes.
And somehow we are being given glimpses of the mystery,
right.
Glimpses of the cosmos.
I wonder if you have in your thought process a memory of some congregational member of Unity of Tustin who came to you in their 50s and was very despondent about the future of her life. And as a result of being in your organization, just really found that spark, that passion, and that purpose. Do you have anybody in mind that you can share with us?
Oh, there have been many, many of them. But what I often find is that it's really not coming from an organization or even a person in the outer, that the spark is initially coming from within the person themselves. That there's something in them, and it may show up as a deep, deep heart's yearning. Sometimes that's preceded by heartbreak, loss, or disappointment, or something you don't understand, that you didn't even want. Sometimes it's preceded by something you did want. You wanted out of a bad circumstance. You wanted out of a bad job or a bad relationship or something like that. But we're seeing the world in terms of right and wrong and good and bad. And instead of what I call seeing the world vertically, where we begin to experience and realize multiple realities that exist simultaneously in our lives, always, already, with the awareness that if we're capable of imagining it, if we're capable of dreaming it, if we're capable of even beginning to get glimpses of thinking it, it's already there, Jeannie. It's there.
Right.
It's waiting to manifest itself in us and through us and as us. If we're willing, and sometimes it requires us to go beyond anything we thought we could do or imagine was possible.
Right, right. So I can only imagine what is now possible with you taking your sphere of influence and expanding it from the brick and mortar of the Unity of Tustin into this worldwide web. The reach is just unfathomable, isn't it?
Well, let me give you one example of how it sometimes works, and you may find these same examples in your life. One of the examples is me as I stepped out of my role of senior minister of 19 years and said yes to living, loving legacy in the telesummit. I didn't know how to do a telesummit. I never considered myself as having technical skills. I wasn't even particularly interested in computers or things like that. My son had a degree in computer science, and I always thought, if I need that, I have him. Well, guess what? He left this planet. He went through the veils, and that was no longer available to me. And then I received this call about you are now called by love. I didn't know what that meant. And then it began coming in. I began following the dots. It was Living Loving Legacy. It was a telesummit. It was all the pieces of my previous life as I had known it, master teachers coming on to a telesummit. And then I had to figure out how to do it, and I didn't know how. At that point in time, someone entered my life that you've met. It was Fabian. Fabian works with me on Living Loving Legacy and Called by Love. And she came and visited one weekend for a Called by Love intensive. And she was in an in-between time in her life. A relationship that she had thought was going to be a marriage had ended. And she didn't know where she would land. She's from Belgium, and she didn't know whether she would go back to Belgium, back to New York, where she had previously lived, stay in Northern California, where the relationship had dissolved, go someplace different. And she just happened to be doing a volunteer event with the Tony Robbins Foundation, where she's a coach, doing training and coaching. And she called me and said, "This event is backed up to Called by Love. Can I come and stay with you and attend the intensive?" And I said, "Of course." At that intensive, my assistant got sick and I didn't have anyone to assist me. And I looked around the room and I thought, who could do this in a moment's notice? And I looked at Fabian and I thought, if she can assist in the Tony Robbins Foundation, she can assist me. And I asked her, and she did an amazing job, just saying yes in an instant and stepping in with huge potential. At the end, I sort of jokingly and laughingly said, you know, if you're interested in a high-level barter, interesting, women know about bartering. If you're interested in a high-level barter, come and help me do the telesummit. I don't know how to do the technical pieces of it. You clearly do. And I've got an extra room, a guest bedroom and a private bath, and we can launch the telesummit together. I was sort of being playful, and everyone in the room laughed and sort of took it as a joke. But the next morning, Fabian, who was staying with me as my guest that weekend, came down the stairs and said, "Could you be serious about that?" This is how surprises can come in our lives.
Right. Well, that's about the thread, the golden thread intersection that you were speaking about. I was going to ask you about that, so why don't we dovetail into that? The golden thread intersection.
Yeah, one of the people on Living Loving Legacy was Constance Kellogg. She is the person who worked with Eckhart Tolle in writing his book, which he wanted to self-publish, his first book, which was The Power of Now. During that time in his life, living in Canada, and where both Constance and he lived, Eckhart was spending a lot of time sitting on a park bench and talking to unknown people and sort of teaching, sort of writing, not knowing what was next. He had stepped out of the life he had known. And at that point in time, Constance was a college teacher, I think. And she had a sort of office in her husband's business office, and they decided that the staff in that office wanted to do some meditation. And did anyone know anyone who could teach meditation? And someone said, well, there's this guy that sits on a park bench. And they said, ask him if he wants to come and talk to us about this and teach us. And he said yes, and he walked in. And that was the beginning of their relationship. He asked her then to help him write the book, to help him figure out how to put it into a manuscript, into book form. When it was self-published as The Power of Now, the two of them walked around together in Washington State and in British Columbia, going to bookstores, peddling the books, getting them to take them on consignment. Golden threads. And on the interview, it's on Living Loving Legacy. It's still free to everyone. All you have to do is register to hear it. Constance talks about how they each had talked about golden threads in their lives, the threads of their destiny that had been there from the moment their soul incarnated, embodied itself in this lifetime. And at one moment in time, those golden threads intersect. And out of that intersection of golden threads, amazing potential. Your lives are changed. And Constance Kellogg went on to be the founder of Namaste Publishing and the publisher of many spiritual books. Eckhart Tolle has gone on to write his books, to do his teaching, and is now famous worldwide, having been on Oprah and all of the things that Eckhart Tolle does. That's the crossing. So in Living Loving Legacy, I looked at every single people on the telesummit and looked at the intersection in time where our lives crossed and how they changed my life. That's how I chose the people, right? How they changed my life. So that's all on that.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. I love that. Yes, some of the ones that I've listened to have so inspired me. I've been taking notes furiously, so I really encourage our listeners to take Marj up on, taking a look at that summon and her new one too that has just come out.
So, well, Living Loving Legacy is www.livinglovinglegacy.com. And then all of the telesummit interviews are there, and then the telecourses, some of which are also free. So there's the summer of 2014, we did a whole summer of free telecourse. So it has been such a joy, finding joy in the unknowing.
Right. Yes, indeed. I love that. And I'd also love what we were speaking about earlier, which is so fascinating about, we're always in the popular culture, the term, this is the dark night of the soul, right? And you have a total different opinion about that. Of course, you can mention the author that was the inspiration for this, but living flame of love as opposed to the dark night of the soul, that's such a disparity. So let's talk more about that.
Yes, of course, John of the Cross was the author of The Dark Night of the Soul, and he wrote that when he was imprisoned, not by the civil authorities, but by his religious brothers. And it's absolutely fascinating what happens to us sometimes in our lives, where when the universe is shifting us out of one platform into another platform, that sometimes we go through dark nights of the soul. So there's actually 3 dark nights. There's the dark night of the senses, which is about our human dark nights. And then there's the dark night of the soul, which is still individualized. And then there's what's called the dark night of the spirit. So there's 3 different levels, and these levels have been talked about by Thomas Keating and taught about by him. He was one of my teachers also. But the John of the Cross, very few people know that the Dark Night of the Soul was not his last book. The final book was after he had made the connection with Teresa of Avila, and the two of them were like twin flames in their relationship, which was so amazing in their balancing of the masculine and the feminine energies, and the way they collaborated in conversation and inspired each other. and ignited even more within each other. And the last piece of writing that he did is called, Andrew Harvey actually told me about this, The Living Flame of Love. And Andrew and I would have deep, deep conversations, and we would walk through the gardens at Unity of Tussin. And one day, Andrew just stopped and he said, Marj, you have got to find the manuscript and read The Living Flame of Love. It's not widely known the way The Dark Night of the Soul is known. But The Living Flame of Love is John of the Cross's last great, incredible book. And it's the stage beyond The Dark Night of the Soul. And I love it. It has inspired me, and it's inspired the mission statement of Called by Love Institute, which is about harnessing the power of love. And that was inspired for me by a person who was one of those links for Jane Houston, Teilhard de Chardin. He's the priest that she used to walk with in the park, Central Park in New York. She talks about it in the interview on Living, Loving Legacy when she was 14 years old. And Teilhard de Chardin has a quote that I just love. And he talks about one day we will harness the power of love. And then for the second time in human history, we will have discovered fire. That is the living flame of love. The discovery of the living flame of love, the discovery of fire for the second time in human history.
I love that. I just had this visual of the eternal flame, at Kennedy's grave, and it just feels like that is firmly embedded inside of our skin,
Yes.
For our own flame to continue to be ignited.
Exactly.
So on this note, I would love to talk about the immense hope that I know you feel about our future. With all the crap that's going on in the world, but yet there are those of us who see a different way, who see a different outcome. Can you speak to the hope that exists?
For me, the hope is the essence of the all that is. And it's there. It's within every person, within every soul, no matter where they are in their own process, whether they're just entering in the process of developmental stages and awareness and in consciousness, whether they're very far along. Each stage has its own levels of initiation. And this has been true in my life, and I'm guessing it may be true in yours and in the lives of many people listening. Sometimes things have to fall apart before they can fall back together.
Yes,
Sometimes we have to go through several relationships before we learn about relationships. Sometimes we have to go through several jobs or career positions before we learn about how to live our life with passion and purpose. Sometimes we have to go through heartbreaks in order to learn how to open our heart in total love and be in the experience of even things that are devastating and hold passion and purpose and bring seeds of light into those settings in order to ignite that within others. And I think that's what's happening in the world now. I think that what is happening now is we're in a dangerous time. And I don't want to in any way minimize the fact that we are experiencing some things that are very dangerous. But what I choose to do in my life is to constantly stay aware of the vertical awareness and the spectrum of consciousness and how the spiral works. And every time we go one level higher in this rainbow of light, We have to go one level deeper. The light that we access will shine into another level of darkness. And so every time we go a level higher, we that light shines on another level of what may be unrecognized in our unconscious, and things will come up. So I had the great gift of co-leading silent meditation retreats for over 15 years. And always, when people would sit in the silence, 1 hour sits 4 or 5 times a day for extended numbers of days, 5, 7 days, 10 days, always as they would sit in the silence and access more light, more levels of the darkness would come up, and tears sometimes, unexplainably, pain. So we always held containers for people to come and ask the questions, to talk about the process that they were experiencing, so that they could talk with someone who had had some experience of walking through this dimension of integration. Because what it is we're integrating more of the vastness, both horizontally and vertically, higher and deeper. So it's profound.
It is profound. It reminds me of, what we teach in our work, and me specifically in my coaching practice, that it's really about stepping back as if you were looking at your situation with a wide angle lens, so that you can detach from the emotionality of it and see it as yourself, part of this larger spectrum of life, and actually how impersonal it all is. I mean, as much as it is personal, how actually impersonal, if that makes sense.
It does. It transcends the personal, and yet it includes the personal. It's both and.
Yeah.
So it's very, very important. We each one of us have such unique, immense, huge gifts. Some of them we realize. Many of them are still unrealized, and we only have glimpses of them. But we'll see someone doing something. Like, people will be seeing you doing this telesummit, and they'll say, wow, Jeannie was just incredible. And then they begin to have thoughts or feelings that come in like, I wonder if I could do that.
Right.
And pretty soon it emerges to, I could do that.
Yes.
And then the fear or the questions come up. I don't know how. And then we have to take a deep breath and open and be willing to reach one hand forward as in preparing the field for this platform that we never even imagined to happen, in order that at one point in time we can reach one hand backward.
And that's what we're doing. That's the purpose of this summit. Thank you for expressing that. That's so profound. We are literally reaching our hands backward and saying, come on, women 50 plus, the most untapped resource. Please join us and help us forward.
Yes.
This altered, uplifted state of consciousness, so that we can learn how to be happier, and we can teach others to be happy and fulfilled in their lives. So Marj, this has been an amazing, amazing interview. And before we end today, I'm wondering if you might talk a little bit about, at the time that your interview airs, there will be a free gift from you to our viewers. And would you like to share a little bit about that?
Yes, and the link for that, which will be on your website, if I'm remembering correctly, Jeannie, will be called by love, all one word, .com/summit gift. And my gift will be, first of all, 2 totally free things that are more individual. One of the gifts will be a PDF of the Unity of Tustin Meditation Garden book. And it's like, I think it's 57 pages long, and it describes the stages of creation. And these are actually stages that I've taught for now 21 or 22 years. Well, more than that, actually, 30 years, because I was also beginning to teach it in Northern California. It started in seminary. And they're based on the codes of co-creation, I call them codes now, that are found actually in the first chapter of Genesis. And one of my seminary teachers said, these are the key to everything, and we don't understand them yet. And I knew at that moment in time, I would spend the rest of my life seeking to know what those codes were. And so that will be one of the gifts. It's just the garden booklet that is based on the beautiful garden sites at Unity in Tustin, California, just about 20 minutes inland from Laguna Beach. So the other free gift is going to be an interview that I did, or actually she did with me, Veronica Tracy Smith, who interviewed me in the garden about my life reflected in the garden sites, and how at different stages in our life we have different roles, different tasks to complete, different things that are part of our destiny at different stages in our lives. And so I tie my whole life into that, and that is a 1-hour interview. And then the other free gifts will be connected to people registering for Living Loving Legacy. And that will be the gift of them being able to access all of the interviews on that telesummit, and also the telecourses for the summer of 2014. That was a free telecourse, Finding Joy in the Unknowing. So those will be some of the things that we'll offer, and who knows, there may be more. I love
my gosh, that's amazing. And for us all to be the really grateful recipients of literally you sharing your legacy with us and all of your teachings. It's been a joy, such a joy. Dr. Marj Brett, everyone, and thank you so much. Many blessings to you.
Oh, and many blessings and much, much love to you, Jeannie. I'm so delighted with what you're doing, and I'm so glad to call you sister.
Thank you. Thank you, and take good care, Marj.